Thank you so much, Malvern Books, and Allison as well. I'm reading from my new book of poems, Music Lesson, and my poems contain a lot of little silver linings, so listen for them. Daylight savings. Early dusk and fog rises to fill the hollows. Terrain flattens under headlamps, becomes finite, and the infinite becomes infinite. We make a path, light by isolated light, to our home, to this kitchen where dinner warms, the house vast around us, our faces lanterns to each other. I'm going to read several short 6-line poems. I don't know if we can bring her back, I imagine them saying as rescuers are bending over me, oh, despairing me, this rainy evening. I drive into a dark so black and full of hazards, unseen crosswalks, sudden flashes. I must hang on to the thought, like a laundry line, that you said you'd be waiting. When I speak of them at a dinner party, my grandfather, grandmother, and great-aunt rouse themselves and reassume the shape of their clothes, surprising me. However ready they stay to counsel or praise, to serve a drink, to comment on a book, and my grandmother's hands fly upward when she cries, "Chrissy's here," as if she's still delighted. We can't revisit each place. Some are closed off from us forever, but from this park bench, we can see across the water and spot the blue canoe, the rocks where we sunbathed behind our first house, a place we couldn't own, but loved. Walking back from a yoga session on a clear night with stars in sharp focus, I recognize Orion, winter hunter, by his diamond-studded belt. Then the pole star, and if I squint, the tight cluster of the Pleiades, the seven sisters. This momentary sense of the infinite, solitude's pleasure. This poem is written in memory of the year we lived in Wales, my family did, autumnal equinox. This turbulent time of year, the smooth water that would have floated you to the further shore turns inward upon itself, ruffled by disturbances you wouldn't have guessed. No sign yet on land, not the buff-colored grasses stirring on the cliff top, nor blackberries plucked poignant and sweet, not the bright painted doors of the village, not even orange leaves blown across the tan darkness of the pond, but old wives' tales worn of unsettled weather, people returning early to their houses, snap-on lights while cooking dinner, the 10 to 6 shipping news forecasts gales, calls the seas by name. If your ship is out to sea, you may wake in darkness, not knowing with any certainty where you may be, in the belly of the beast, your berth pitching along with each swell, forcing you to call out for whatever God you worship after all. Summer of the Cardinals. I hear the female perched on a patio chair singing after my daughter's last summer home that began with a cardinal pair shuttling back and forth, knitting their nest. Chicks peeped in the trellis as the rose budded. A squirrel lurked on the fringe, about to turn bland sweetness into something fraught. Roused by the parents' racket, I shooed him away, too late. Only one nestling survived. My daughter was enamored with this awkward chick who toad-like, with wide-toed mouth, shrilled and shrilled, giving his perch away, making himself vulnerable to every enemy. He flapped and swooped, conspicuous and comic across our backyard, accompanied by his straight man, red-suited father, who was a worrier and had cause to be. The youth grew a tuft, became the color of a house finch with his first dusty red feathers, fell once each from the bird bath and the feeder. We saw him less frequently, gliding to the table or a branch, almost, not quite, missing. He grew redder, smoother, less visible, then disappeared, and the only way to distinguish him from other birds of the brush was his insistent piping. Now the mother I'd overlooked reappears and sings her song. I've left the door of my study open to the cooler weather, to the sounds of a crescendo fading. Summer afternoon. One June day after attending a wedding, we are driving down a country road, past banks starred with daylilies on our way to another party, feeling married and enclosed as rain flecks our windows, lashing the car, the road, the grasses, the bright and hot transformed into a blue-green, swaying, seaweedy crossing, the grasses and lilies bearing down, and we immerse ourselves too, like swimmers headed across a body of water on a summer's passage to the next island or point across the bay, hoping our stamina will not fail. Lately, one or the other of us has been lagging, as if we suffer from the same anomaly, a hole in the heart, that brought on the stroke from which our daughter now haltingly recovers. We step out into moisture dripping from trees, as on a long ago vacation up in Canada or New Hampshire, when I was a child or we had children, when this sort of start boded how the whole day would be, not very summery, but we insisted on it being summer, and so it was. And my last poem is entitled Picture from the Group of Seven, and is based on the painting The Tangled Garden by J.E.H. MacDonald, and you may have seen this as a print or greeting cards. It was written about, or painted about 100 years ago. I have often stopped on the landing to stare at this framed print of a bountiful garden past maturity. I would stop and think of melancholy. But why melancholy? Is it something about the faded hues of mustard and olive and off-red? Maybe it's the black outlines, as in an etching or engraving, but coarser and blacker, like block printing with channels cut by a body leaning on a chisel. A tool for digging, like the hoe that must lie just off stage from the picture, waiting to turn the composting leaves into soil. I think I recognize this place, or at least this frame of mind, with the garden just past the peak of all its glory, its heavy fruits and brilliant petals, sometime in mid-August before the cool of fall sets in, the shadows and undersides becoming visible, manifested by cross hatches and lines. Sometime while I wasn't looking, busy with preparations, engaged in my work, it happened. No more than the complications that arise in an ordinary life. Faults, illness, sadness, a child's failure to thrive. I pause on the stairs to think of these things and notice how Deshabla has overtaken the orderly way in the picture. Tattered foliage and striations that had been obscured by lushness have just begun to appear. On the stalks of sunflowers, first dots, then streaks, a shocking red like blood you wouldn't have expected, shading deeper into mahogany. As in my life, a more worn and patient, less believable version of myself has learned to perform ministrations, driving a friend to the hospital, sharing in joy, all the careful acts that mend an enmity. Now I see how thrust gives way to thickening and woodiness, to the gnarled and curious, the turned aside. Finally, after all these years and flights, I come to see the beauty. Thank you.